Christopher Lighton, and these are the men presenting China in this course, both senior scholars at Harvard, scholars of China today and of Confucian antiquity, students of the arts, politics, of ideas, of daily life in China. William Kirby and Peter Bull. We come to a new moment and a new audience. What's the big picture story?
I think there's a tremendous curiosity in China, rightfully so, about how the world outside of China is looking at China today. And this is an opportunity for people in China to see how not only how Bill Kirby and I look at China through time, but also how around 20 other Harvard faculty in their own fields are thinking about China as well.
And so we can give, in some sense, our Chinese friends an outsider's view of what China may look like.
Our job, in part, is to give people the very rich resources we have so they can develop feelings about China. Feelings that can combine admiration and interest with anxiety. But we're not assuming that people really have very many feelings yet. They have some curiosity, they worry perhaps about China today, or they admire China today, but our job is to give them a picture of a civilization, so that just as with the Renaissance, just as about when you think of Paris or you think of Florence, you can start to say, I recognize that, I'm interested in that, but also that in the world we live in today, that the cultural resources of China can also be resources we draw upon in thinking in the present.
We have all types of views freely expressed and discussed here. And Harvard, for all of its age and all of its success, Harvard has no foreign policy.
Truly.
Truly.
We could never agree upon one.
That's right.
You agree?
We'll get to that later. One of our jobs in this is to complicate the idea of what China is.
Thinking about how China has developed over time in all its complexity is a foundation for making sense out of what China is doing today.
China is, of course, a large country and a major power today. But as a country, it's actually quite new, about 100 years old. Before that, there were empires with different names.
We would call dynasties.
Dynasties. But there are many languages, many cultures within this realm that we call China, today.
It's not just a story of politics and great power. It's also a story of religion, of belief, of philosophy, of art, and of human creativity.
And how modern world history is really inseparable, that is an integral part of modern Chinese history. You can't understand the one without, in some sense, understanding the other.
What does it mean that we're doing this in an online course, a wide open, free experiment in university education?
In a digital environment now, we can do things that we didn't do before. We can make things available we couldn't make before to a much broader audience than ever before.
So the act of teaching in and of itself is an act of practicing or trying to practice what you have learned and what you have studied.
Part of our goal here is, in fact, to make it possible for people to talk to each other.
People around the world from whom we can learn. We've learned enormously from our students.
Something like this is a chance for them to enter into a world of discourse and conversation. There's another part to it, which is that we've learned something about teaching. We can sit in front of a class or stand in front of a class and lecture for 50 minutes. And in fact, there are diminishing returns. After the first 10 or 15 minutes of lecture, students retain less and less and less. In this new forum, what we're doing is we're dividing up the lecture into smaller pieces. After each piece, there's some discussion, chance for students to reflect on what they've heard, to read something else and comment on it.
What are the prerequisites for this course?
Curiosity. And nothing else. We try to structure the course in such a way that you're not expected to know everything before you begin. It's just like learning a language, right? You begin with the simple, and you build up and you build cumulatively, and it becomes more advanced, and you practice it more often. Well, history is like that too. Learning the history of a civilization, you begin in the past. You begin with the basics of what does it mean to interpret an object, a Neolithic artifact, for example. How do we read an early text and understand it? These are the sources from which we know Chinese history.
I think people want to know your histories.
I came to Harvard to study history, generally history, European primarily, but also Chinese history. And I came under the mentorship of John Fairbank. And it was John Fairbank who early, gradually, steadily drew me into the field and became a wonderful mentor and graduate teacher. But when I look back on everything that I thought I knew about China, which was very little, quite frankly, at the time, particularly what we thought we knew about the history of the Republic, of the People's Republic, of the Cultural Revolution, almost all of it, when I first got interested in China, turns out to have been wrong.
Peter Bowl, tell us your story. How did China enter your life?
I was a high school student, and I was a politically active high school student. I had always been interested in history, but primarily American history. And so my interest in China really came out of American politics. At that moment, I began to study, pay attention to China's past, and learn about it, learn to read text from various periods and the history of various periods. And then it was absolutely fascinating because I began to learn about these things I had never imagined before. And that opened a whole new world. And I worked back and I began to become very interested in all the things that happened between the 8th century and the 12th, 13th century at first.
Both Peter and I got involved in China in part because of our interest in American politics.
We studied China for the sake of America, not for the sake of China. I think we studied China because it's really important in world history, and it will be important. Our effort here, teaching at Harvard in the United States, is to give people a nuanced and sophisticated view of China's history, past and present.